These are the most recognizable characters in the history of video games: Pac-Man and Super Mario. 40 years ago, people were buying them by the millions, just like Sony TVs, Walkman players, Canon, Nikon and Fuji cameras, new cars from Nissan and Toyota, and Nintendo game consoles. But you probably get that all these guys are originally from Japan. The economy of this country was booming in the 80s, developing so rapidly that some were convinced it would catch up with and surpass America within the next 10 years. But something went wrong. China will surpass and replace Japan itself. Toshiba computers will be replaced by Apple laptops. Sony TVs will be replaced by Korean Samsung. Instead of an economic miracle, Japan has been in an endless economic stagnation for the past 30 years. The population is decreasing and aging, and those who invested in local company stocks in the late 80s still haven't recouped their money. Why couldn't Japan become a global leader? It lost its potential. And does the country have prospects today? These are the top 10 most expensive companies in the world right now. 8 out of 10 are American. Now, take a look at the top 10 most expensive companies in the world 40 years ago. 8 out of 10 were Japanese. Well, that's precisely 1989, the country in complete abundance. Banks are practically giving away money, so you can easily get a loan at 2.5%, and mortgages are offered for up to 100 years. Japanese wealthy individuals indulge in luxury, setting record after record. Someone buys the world's most expensive diamond for $6.5 million, a rare book for almost $6 million, Van Gogh's sunflowers for a whopping $40 million. It gets to the point that in 1989, the Japanese company Sony buys an entire American film company, Columbia Pictures, for $3.5 billion. Within Japan itself, the price tags are astronomical by this time. To give you an idea, the price per square meter of a real estate in Tokyo reaches $1 million. Not a $1 million apartment, but $1 million per square meter. So, well, to understand this, we need to go back a couple of decades. The country actively absorbs Western technologies, not for free, of course. So, how does it work? Take, for example, the American giant DuPont. In the early 20th century, active scientific research is conducted there to invent some new promising material. And as a result, they come up with a useful thing called nylon. So, for those who don't know, nylon is used to make women's stockings, toothbrushes, sturdy parachutes, and even the American flag that stands on the moon is made of nylon, and a bunch of other clothing. So DuPont spends 11 years and around $20 million on these scientific studies. And what does the Japanese company Toray do? Instead of spending 11 years and $25 million, they simply pay DuPont $7.5 million for the patent and comfortably earn at least $90 million by producing and selling nylon worldwide. Other Japanese companies operate in a similar fashion. They massively vacuum up patents and licenses, mainly American ones. over 20 years, they acquire 15,000 such technology permits. They start producing things in Japan, tweaking the technologies to make them better than where they bought them. Eventually, Japan at some point just floods with the world with cheap electronics, optics, cameras, TVs. The scale is well demonstrated by a picture with the founder of Panasonic surrounded by everything Panasonic produces and sells at that time. So, what suddenly goes wrong? Let's examine this data. Which cars are the best selling in the United States in 1970? Naturally, all Americans. Ford, Chevrolet, Pontiac, Buick, Dodge, a little Volkswagen for variety. And what about 15 years later? Ford and Chevrolet seem to be leading, but in popularity, Toyota is already third. So with each passing year, other Japanese cars sell better. This applies to all other Japanese technology and electronics. Essentially, Japan at that time is like China 10 or 15 years ago, a cheap global factory for everything. But at some point, Western countries start to get uneasy. Not because they don't like buying cheap Japanese goods. For many years, everything is fine with that. The problem is that local producers are losing to the Japanese year after year. So this means people in the same United States start losing jobs. Just look at how some Americans in 82nd, as a sign of protest, smash Japanese cars and urge their neighbors to buy American cars.
We've got Tim Donovan here taking his frustrations out on this 78 Toyota.
And here is an interesting situation. For decades, the United States has been selling its technologies for hard cash, pumping money into Japan, hoping they won't fall into communism with China next door, and everyone is fine with that. But as soon as it becomes disadvantageous for the Americans themselves, everything changes. Listen to how in September 85th, President Reagan dismantles all these supposedly profitable trade relations over the years.
When governments permit counterfeiting or copying of American products, it is stealing our future and it is no longer free trade.
And it's no wonder that exactly a day before this fearless speech, free trade, at least for Japan, comes to an end.
It's not free trade. If you ever go to Japan right now and try to sell something, forget about it, Oprah. Just forget about it. It's almost impossible.
In September 85th, at the Plaza Hotel in New York, representatives of the US, Germany, France, the UK, and of course, Japan agreed to align currency exchange rates for convenient trade. So what does this mean? Imagine the dollar is expensive at that moment. And what's wrong with that? Well, on one hand, it's good. It's advantageous for the US to buy everything abroad from Japan or Germany, for instance. But in such a case, selling American goods becomes more difficult. Why sell here when you can buy it there? So this leads to an imbalance where you buy more than you sell. And that's bad for any economy. So there are two options. Either weaken the dollar or impose protective tariffs on Japanese goods, so the local American producers don't go out of business. In the end, they decide to agree and devalue the American dollar. Consequently, American products become more competitive. But attention, the Japanese yen starts soaring much faster and higher than agreed upon, and no one wants to massively buy Japanese TVs, cameras and cars as before because they cease to be cheap. However, the Japanese seem indifferent. Local wealthy individuals start flaunting their wealth, even buying American movie companies, as you may recall. How you can even buy Hollywood star like Schwarzenegger to feature in their unique local advertising.
これからも美味しくごったんです20周年記念カップヌードル限定発売中
In the following 5 years of this unrestrained financial rivalry, the Japanese economy inflates like a soap bubble, only to burst powerfully, marking the beginning of the hangover of the lost decades. So that's what they call them, the lost decades. And here is where an interesting phenomenon emerges: the zombie companies. So, imagine a retail chain like 7-Eleven. Is it needed by the country? Well, of course. Stores sell an essential purpose, selling food, employing hundreds of thousands of people, and supporting families. And now, imagine that such a company carries a debt of $17 billion. Is it needed by the country? What should be done about it? So, the Japanese government decides to rescue the local supermarket chain and starts providing it with easy, low-interest loans. So, it's a pity to leave people without jobs and banks without the money they are owed if you shut them down. Now, why are they called zombies? Because such a company is like a zombie. It's neither alive nor dead. All it earns goes not into its own development, but towards repaying debts. Essentially, it doesn't progress. If there were only 1 or 2 such firms in the country, that would be one thing. By 2000, every third Japanese company is a zombie. Even now, in 2024, when you read about Japan, you constantly come across articles stating that Japan hasn't recovered from that crisis. Everything is bad. But well, wait, how bad? Look at how darn good Tokyo is. There they are, Sony cameras, Canon, Toyota, Honda, Nissan cars, they haven't disappeared anywhere. So attention, a question. In the last 30 years, has there been any new globally renowned Japanese tech team that made a breakthrough with new ideas? So what do I mean? Let's revisit the list of the most expensive companies in the world. There they are, in everyone's pocket and on the desktop, Apple and Microsoft. They start rising precisely after 85th. Google, Amazon and Meta take off in the 2000s and Tesla in 2010s. How many new Chinese companies are among the leaders? Alibaba, Tencent. There is even the South Korean Samsung, which initially imported TVs from Japan, such as Sanyo, and later assembled them in Korea.
So come along and watch your Samsung.
And where on this list of the 100 most expensive companies are the Japanese? Only one, Toyota. And that's precisely why all this time is called lost. What about the future of the country today? It's debatable. Because on the one hand, you can live a very long time in Japan. The average life expectancy there, along with Hong Kong, is the highest in the world at 85 years. The problem is that there are a lot of people there who are over 65. That's 35 million people. It's every third person in the country. And for 40 consecutive years, the number of children has been decreasing. In the future, this may lead not to zombie companies, but to an entire zombie country. Because the younger generation will work not for their own development, but to pay for millions of retirees. Already in Japan there is a problem known as corrosion, death from overwork. Every year the government officially recognizes at least 200 such cases, because on average the Japanese work 80 or 100 hours of overtime each month. They use only half of their vacation days, and for many young couples it's easier to get a dog than a child because it's very expensive. Even with this, I'm confident that Japan will continue to develop, because some countries are still far from these heights and levels of technology, like reaching for the stars. But it's still interesting. Could Japan have avoided the crash? To answer this, let's look at China today, the world's second largest economy. They first flooded all countries with their cheap goods and then improved their technology to surpass those from whom they initially bought or stole them. But there is a difference, and it lies in this. For Japan, the point of no return was not the crazy speculation in the late 80s. It was just symptoms of the disease, not its essence. The root of the evil is hidden in that Plaza Hotel agreement. After that, everything goes over. Could the country have refused it and not signed it, sending everyone away, especially the United States, for whom this agreement was most beneficial? Unlikely. Tokyo was afraid of losing the American market, afraid of tariffs, and wanted to remain under Washington's protection. In any case, the states would simply impose protective duties on everything Japanese, and trade wars would begin. So, does it remind you of anything? China today, in trade wars and tariffs, is quite reminiscent.
On another $200 billion of Chinese exports,
igniting the biggest trade war in economic history.
But they control their own currency and economy. And there is a feeling that the country will avoid the wild 80s in the Japanese style after all.